if I can pass the 30-20-10 rule. So if I don't pass, stop. Growth isn't your problem. Fix the unit level economics, get the basics dialed in. If a company doesn't have a 30% gross profit, I tell people stop. Don't scale, fix. As I'm doing diligence, I'm also focused heavily on what is the employee experience going to be. Think about the company you're buying. Those employees, what are they going to be worried about on closing day when they find out the company was sold?
What one key piece of advice would you like to give to all the entrepreneurs watching and listening today?
Success starts in here. It's in your head, it's in your brain. Why not you? Look in the mirror and ask yourself, what prevents you from achieving, the next level of success?
Hey, and welcome to another episode of the Business Growth Show. I'm your host, Ethan Cassiotis, and today I have an awesome guest. His name is Adam Coffey. He's a CEO, board member, best-selling author, and acclaimed international speaker. Adam Coffey is a visionary leader who drives transformative growth and fosters high-performance cultures. With 21 plus years of experience as a CEO, Adam built 3 national service companies for 9 private equity sponsors. And during this time, he completed 58 acquisitions. His track record includes notable outcomes measured in the billions with a B, and he brings diverse expertise from commercial and industrial service businesses alongside being a licensed general contractor, pilot, former GE executive, and US Army veteran. And as an author, Adam's books, The Private Equity Playbook, The Exit Strategy Playbook, and Empire Builder all became Amazon #1 bestsellers. And recognized as one of the most influential leaders by Orange County Business Journal 4 years in a row, he founded the CEO Advisory Guru in 2021, providing consulting services to private equity firms, their portfolio companies, and to founders seeking to scale, do M&A, and exit. And he resides in Westlake, Texas with his family. Welcome, Adam, and thank you for being on the Business Growth Show.
Ethan, good to see you. Hello to all your listeners out there. I'm pumped. Let's do this.
Definitely, Adam. I'm sure it's going to be amazing for everyone watching and listening today. And you are a successful entrepreneur. So for those people that know who you are, just introduce yourself by telling us a little bit more about you and your journey.
Yeah, I think life is a set of experiences for all of us. They're all building, they're additive one on another. So version 1.0 Adam was a soldier in the US Army. Military taught me about discipline, teamwork, leadership, really great foundational skills. If I don't serve there as a young man long ago, I never hit the levels that I did, in my career. From there, I became an engineer. Adam 2.0 was an engineer, meticulous planner. That's what engineers are. Taught me all about planning, very detailed, oriented type. Always a strategic plan in place. Planes fly into buildings, things happen, economies can crash, you can have wars and pandemics, and I was a CEO during all of that kind of stuff. But we adapt, we alter the plan. But the important part is planning for contingencies, being a meticulous planner. Adam 3.0 spent 10 years at GE during the Camelot era of GE. This is when GE was #1 on the Fortune 500 list. Tech doesn't exist yet. Jack Welch is the world's most admired CEO. GE, the world's largest company, is growing so fast it's doubling in size, roughly every 3 years. And what a great place for me as an up and coming business leader to learn how to run a business. I left GE in 2001 when Jack and all the other leaders left. There was like this big whooshing sound as all the talent at GE just kind of like walked out the door at the same time. And then I spent, 21 years, as you said. So Adam 4.0 was, a CEO for decades. And, I had good runs, multiple runs, each company, multiple ownership periods, and, 2.5 billion in successful exits. And so, as I was going through my CEO career, I got to a point where I kind of got bored. And I was, I had written my first book. I had spent years as a guest speaker at UCLA, one of the large, colleges, universities here in the U.S., in their executive MBA program, and loved mentoring, teaching, and giving back. Wasn't making any money doing that. Was making a ton of money as a CEO, but I was just bored, silly, and I needed a new challenge. And so I wanted to figure out how to swap those paradigms. And that's when I just hung up my cleats, said I'm done being a CEO, started a consulting business. I'm an army of one again, and and I'm having a blast. So I'm working with dozens of PE firms. I'm working with I think last count was 71 founder-led companies on 5 different continents, including right there in Australia. And I'm having fun, and so that's what it's all about, and helping people learn how to succeed is kind of what I've dedicated the last 10 years of my career to. So I'm 61 now. I'm going to ride this through 70, and then I'll kind of reevaluate when I get there. But having fun for now, working more hours than I ever did, which I didn't think was possible. But hey, as long as I'm having fun, it's not work, right?
Yeah, definitely, Adam. I love those different stages of your life, and I agree. If it's fun, it doesn't feel like work, and as long as you're enjoying it, and I think you get to make a bigger impact, right? By those 70+ companies you said by founder led and everything like that, rather than just like for the big guys. It sounds like there's a bit more purpose,
Sure.
behind it as well, which is nice to give back. And I've been grateful learning from you as well, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of amazing learnings that we get here today, right? And I think there's two sides to business that I want to talk about on this podcast today. I know obviously you're big in the M&A space, but first you got to get the business right. That's the important part, before we think about like, acquiring, exiting and all of that. So one of the rules that I love for you to teach everybody is the 30-20-10 rule, because I think this is really paramount to getting a successful business.
Okay, I'm going to teach it to you and to all your listeners out there. This is what I do anytime I'm asked to evaluate a company, and whether I'm buying a company or PE is buying a company, and they're paying me a fortune to try to read through an investment guidebook, a sim, a confidential information memorandum. Please, Adam, come help me evaluate this company. So I'm going to teach your listeners how to do this. Don't tell private equity my secrets, though. Okay. So we call it the 30-20-10 rule. We need a framework anytime we're evaluating a business, whether it's our own. Because remember, as a CEO, I stepped into businesses that had been around for 40 years before I got there. And every time I went in as CEO, it was my first time working in that given industry. So I needed a quick way to immerse. And these were all turnarounds. I was a turnaround guy at GE. So after 40 years, these companies had lost their way. And, I'm hired to be a CEO, never worked in the industry. It's like, boom, come on in, got to figure out how everything's wired. And so I came up with this framework or methodology that over the decades I perfected, especially with acquisitions when I was looking at other people's companies. And so it's called the 30-20-10 rule. And basically it goes like this. If I want to build a successful company, if I want to build an empire, and I'm not just talking about taking a small business, to $1 million in revenue or 10 million. I'm talking about you want to build $1 billion company, you need to pass the 30-20-10 rule before you scale. So I grab the P&L. It requires the income statement to be wired correctly. So all the expenses have to be hitting in the appropriate place on the income statement. If they are, I'm first looking at the financials of a company and I'm looking for a 30+% gross profit. Now, I'd actually like to see 35%, but 30 is my minimum. And if a company doesn't have a 30% gross profit, I tell people stop, don't scale, fix. If you're not getting 30% gross profit, either you're not charging enough in price or your expenses to service that revenue at the direct expense level are too high. So you got to go back and focus on unit level economics. And I won't get off on that tangent yet. So I'm looking for companies to have at least a 30% gross profit margin. I'm then looking for them to have less than 20% SG&A or sales and general administration expense or indirect expense. We call it different things around the world. And so I'm looking for a company to have at least 30% gross profit, less than 20% back office cost, because we have to make minimum a dime on a dollar in order to be what I'll call a successful company that is ready to scale. Now, as I continue to build that business, I'm eventually going to get to 35, 15, and 20. Best in class for most industries, most companies, other than software in tech. where we charge high prices, high profit, and we don't have money expenses at all. But most of the kinds of companies that I run, companies that do things, manufacture things, service things, I'm looking for 35, 15, 20, 20% profit. That would be a best in class in many industries. So I use the 30, 20, 10 to evaluate how a business is performing currently. And it also informs my thinking on where I need to attack. Because remember, if I'm doing a turnaround, I don't have a lot of time to play with. A private equity hold period is generally 5 years. I have to be able to come in, assess almost instantly where a business isn't functioning, pause, take a time out, cease growth, fix the model, and then turn it back on and then get it to grow at levels it had never grown before, which I've been able to do in all my companies. And so 30, 20, 10 is my way, my little cheat sheet way of knowing how a business is performing. If it can't do 30% gross profit, I'm not charging enough for my product or my expenses are too high. And if I'm not earning a dime on a dollar, and I've got 30% gross profit, it means my back office costs are way too high. All the people, the boat anchors, a CEO is a boat anchor. It's like we don't generate revenue, we're a cost. So if I look at accounting, HR, legal, general administrative costs, rent, all these things that I've got that make up my overhead expenses, if those are better than 20% and I don't have 30% GP, I don't have the right profit margin. And I can't tell you how many entrepreneurs, Ethan, over my career have told me, hey, Adam, I'll figure out how to make money when I get bigger. I need revenue. Everything's revenue. And let me tell you, revenue doesn't matter at all. What matters is that we've got the fundamentals dialed in, that we're passing 30, 20, 10 on our way to 35, 15, 20. And if I can get those basics correct, I'm guaranteed that I could scale that business to $1 billion. I could be one of 3,000 companies on the planet. I've built multiple, that get to $1 billion if I can pass the 30, 20, 10 rule. So if I don't pass, stop. Growth isn't your problem. Fix the unit level economics, get the basics dialed in. If it works small, it's ready to scale big. And then as it gets bigger, it'll improve. Everything will improve as it's getting larger. But if I have a problem small, if I get bigger, all I'm going to do is amplify the problem. And that's where entrepreneurs get in trouble. I rather fail working with $100,000 company than fail working with $100 million company, right? So 30, 20, 10 is my basic evaluation tool that I use to troubleshoot, or to evaluate acquisitions or to assess my own company when I'm doing a turnaround. So that's the 30, 20, 10 in a nutshell.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Amazing, very, very powerful thing that I use with my clients as well now when they're trying to do cost plus models. I go, no, 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 no. We got to make sure that the numbers work right in what we're doing here. And you mentioned level economics, right? Because I know
Yeah.
you've done multiple like billions, right, in the exits and stuff like that with companies, and that works from how you're growing, even from an organic sense, but also from like an M&A side of things, right? That you're doing there. So do you want to just quickly share a little bit about going, well, we've got to make sure that the business can do that big amount, right? That we want to hit as well.
Yeah. So unit level economics, and this is a part of the 30 and the 30, 20, 10 rule. So unit level economics, I take any business and I break it down to its lowest fundamental revenue generation capability. So let's say I'm a landscape maintenance company. I think in Empire Builder, I use landscape maintenance as a proxy simply because everybody around the world understands landscape maintenance. I have a garden, I have a yard, somebody cuts it, they make it pretty, and they come every week and I pay a recurrent contract, or we could substitute with pest control. Everybody has bugs. We've got bugs in Sydney. We got bugs here in Texas. And it's like I pay companies to come spray around my house and I pay them to come do that every month. So the basic unit level economic. Well, if I have a landscape maintenance company and there's been multiple multi-billion-dollar landscape companies built as roll-ups, by private equity. So it's a good topic, good proxy. So what's the smallest unit level, or revenue generating, economic model that I've got? Well, in a landscape maintenance company, it's one truck. I've got a truck. I can't have half a truck. I can't have three-quarters of a truck. I need a full truck. I need a truck, a crew of two, a mower, a blower, a weed whacker, maybe some rakes and shovels and some basic hand tools. That's my revenue generating unit. And so I build a model, and I really like the concept of getting it. I want to make success simple, especially for most entrepreneurs who have smaller businesses. And I like to develop what I call as napkin math. So if I think about a crew, and I don't care if the company has 5,000 crews, let's just talk about one crew. How many lawns can they cut in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year? What's the average price I'm going to charge to get, to cut a lawn, or maintain someone's garden, pull weeds and, do all the stuff I got to do and weed whack and blow and all that junk. It's like, how many lawns can I do? How much can I charge? What is the total revenue that unit level can generate in a month, in a year? And that becomes my economic model, my revenue model. And then I create an expense model. And so the expense model is, how much does it cost me to pay the payment on that truck, to put gasoline in it, to buy car insurance, to keep maintenance reserves in case that truck needs to be worked on, and then how much is it to service and keep gasoline and whatever in my weed whacker, in my mower? How much does it cost for the mower payment if I've got one of those fancy riding mowers, zero turn radius, drives like a tank? How do I, it's like, what's all of the cost? What's the labor cost? What's the hourly wage? What's the benefits cost? What's the payroll taxes? What are the total cost to have that unit on the road generating that revenue? So I've got a revenue model. I've got an expense model. If that doesn't yield 30% gross profit, I have to stop. I don't want a second truck on the road, a third, a fourth, a hundredth, a thousandth. I've run companies that have had, 1,900 trucks on the road. And I recently was asked by a board of a big company everybody knows here in the U.S. and that has 6,000 trucks on the road, and they've gone through CEOs like you wouldn't believe, multiple CEOs, very short period of time. And they're like, Adam, nobody can fix this. It's a turnaround. It's like, why can't anybody fix this? And the problem is they're all looking at it wrong. They're looking at it from the top down with billions of revenue and thousands of trucks, and they're trying to do stuff and they're not getting the basics. Can I make money with one truck? Because if I can't make money with 6,000. And if I can fix one truck, I can fix them all. So how much revenue? What's the cost of the unit? Can I produce 30% gross profit? In the case of that giant company, they were making 21% gross profit, and their back office cost was 23%. So it fails the 30-20-10 miserably, and that's why they're losing money. That's why they're losing $50 to $100 million, every year, is because the fundamentals don't work. It's like, build that basic model for revenue, for cost. That's the 30 of the 30-20-10 rule. And if I can get the fundamentals to work right, then again, I can build any size business I want. Scaling becomes a different issue. I'm scaling something that works, not something that's problematic, or something that's failed, looking for its first dollar of profit through scale. It's easy to run a bad business. It's easy to build a bad business as long as you've got money. But it's hard to build a good business. But if you can build it at the unit level and then get it to work, you can build a gigantic company that works even better. And it's like, and that's how it's done. So that's the unit level economic thing. And I don't care what industry you're in. There is a unit level economic for every one of them. If I'm building buildings, one building becomes my unit level economic. If I have a retail facility, I like to focus on square footage, revenue per square foot, cost per square foot, and so there's no matter what industry it is, I can kind of find some proxy for unit level. Am I making money small? If I can, then I can scale. If I'm not making money small, I need to stop, figure out how to make money small so that I get to the 30 on the 30-20-10. So that's kind of unit level economics, in its basic form.
Yeah, awesome, Adam. I love that. Really break it down. I like those examples as well that you gave, right? That it is for any industry, and then it's easy to scale, right, to go from there. So we've done the 30-20-10, right? We've got the unit economics right there. We're growing organically, maybe through M&A, right? With growing the company. We want to go for an exit. We're planning for an exit, right? I know you're the master at this, right? And one thing you taught me was the private equity pyramid, right? And there's certain
Yeah.
ideal EBITDA exit points, right? And have certain multiples. Did you want to tell people about this, of when is the most likely or the best time, right, that we should be looking at our business from a profitability EBITDA point and
Yeah,
exiting as
and
well?
so
Yeah.
I'm a pilot, and the pilot in me, you don't take off unless you know where you're going. And then you deconstruct the trip. How much fuel do I need on board? What's the weather going to be like en route to my destination? If I have an issue, what are my alternate airports? I mean, there's a lot of planning that goes in place before you ever jump in the cockpit and take off. And so I like to think of entrepreneurs needing that same level of rigor and discipline and saying, what am I building to? What am I building for? And how do I know when I get there? If I don't have this stuff in mind, then I'm the blind leading the blind, and I don't know when I've achieved success. I don't know when it's time to think about monetizing my asset. And I think too many entrepreneurs start without an exit in mind. And so the idea behind finding the perfect exit to me is then, we talked about the private equity pyramid. So just, real quickly, in any country, but I'll give you some numbers from the US. There's 34 million small businesses in the United States. I'm doing 3 roll-ups in the accounting space right now. And and in the accounting space, there's 1.8 million accounting firms in the US. And I'm doing one in chiropractic, and there's 108,000 chiropractic offices in the US. And so when you have a lot of something small, there's not enough buyers, and the multiples that those companies trade for tend to be small. As we get bigger, we become rare. I already mentioned it. There's only 3,000 companies on the entire planet that have $1 billion in revenue. Only 3,000. So in the US, we go from 34 million small and globally only 3,000 at the top. And so as companies become bigger, they become rare really quick. And we're rewarded as entrepreneurs for growing something that's bigger by getting paid a higher multiple of earnings when it's time for us to exit that business. Now, private equity, there's 7 trillion in assets under management. Thousands, tens of thousands of PE firms that are out there. Some are big, some are small. Biggest ones on the planet: KKR, Apollo, Blackstone, Carlyle. Those firms have funds that range in size from $10 billion to $30 billion. Those are big funds. And then you got tens of thousands of firms that get smaller, smaller, smaller. And the smallest of firms might have 100 million, 200 million in their fund. But they all do the same identical things. The fund lasts 10 years. They have 6 years to invest the money in the fund. They have to return all the money at the end of the 10th year. That's how they're structured. All of them, for asset diversification rules, never invest more than about 12% of their fund in any one company, but they like to invest 6 to 8%. So if I'm KKR and I've got a $30 billion fund, I can't buy small companies because it would take me 1,000 years to put my billions to work buying small companies. I only have 6 years to do it. So PE is very disciplined. Big firms with big funds buy big companies. Not many of them out there, but they're the ones who buy them. And then all the way down, small firms with small funds buy small companies. Now, because of this phenomenon, that PE pyramid, I call it, has 5 layers to the pyramid. There's like 5 natural exit points where I'm going to find a little bit larger size PE firm with a bigger fund circling like sharks looking for a meal to eat. We're building the meals as entrepreneurs, and there's certain points where we exit where we're going to find these buyers. And everywhere I reach this next level of exit point, I'm rewarded with higher multiples being paid for the companies that I'm selling. And so in my world, I like to tell people that the real world of private equity, so traditional funds, lots of investors, 10-year fund life. There's people below my level I'm going to talk about that call themselves PE firms. And there are probably some people who've been very successful. They made a lot of money, but they don't have traditional limited partners. They're not kind of operating. They just call themselves private equity because they are private capital. But the real first exit point we start to get to when we're over 3 million in earnings and we're getting up to about 4 million in earnings. And so I've got kind of like 4 million to 7 million is one class of buyer. When I get up over 10 million, I start encountering another buyer from like 10 million to 20 million. That's an ideal exit band. So I've got like 4 to 7 is one size buyer, might have a fund size of 250 million, 400 to 400 million, somewhere in that range. I get over 10 million in earnings up to about 20. Now I've got funds that are like 7, 800 up to $1.5 billion, that are buying. And then I get up to about 40 to 50 million, 40 to 60 million. That is 3 billion, 5 billion funds. I get up over 100, million in earnings. I'm talking earnings now. And then I start getting into the biggest funds on the planet. And so there's these natural exit points that I shoot for. So if I'm building a company, and I mentioned landscape maintenance, pest control, things that aren't very sexy, if I can get to about 4 million in earnings, I'm probably going to get rewarded, depending on the industry, somewhere between 8, it might even be as high as 10 times earnings on that exit. So if I get to 4 million in earnings, I might get an exit of 30 to 40 million. If I can get up to 10 million of earnings to get to that next class of buyers, I might be rewarded with 120, could be 150 million in exit. The multiples have gone up from that, call it 7, 8 times up to about, anywhere from 10, 12 to 15 times. Again, depending on the company, depending on the earnest, the industry that I'm playing in, what the profile is of the company. And so, we need to kind of build a company with that in mind. And I use M&A as an accelerator. So I'm passing the 30-20-10 because I focused on unit level economics really early. And then as I'm starting to scale and grow, I want to grow organically the fastest that I can, but very difficult. So a great exit is where I can do about 4 times my money, 3 to 4 times my money as an investor. Well, that means I need a growth rate probably in the 20 to 30% per year range. Well, very few mature companies can grow at that. When you have $1 of revenue and you go to 2 and you say, boy, there's 100% growth. That's different than a 40-year-old company that's been in business for decades. They're probably lucky if they get to double-digit organic growth. Most companies that I've worked with, I can get them into the low teens organically. I can find 3 or 4, maybe 5 points of margin improvement, but I still have a gap. And my goal is get to 30% growth in earnings every year. And if I can hit that, that company will quadruple in size in 5 years. And that sets me up for a great exit. And so I use M&A then to sprinkle on top of my max organic rate, my margin improvement. I'm scaling, I'm getting better at what I do as I get bigger, and then I've got a gap. I fill that gap with M&A, and I bake a cake. And my cake is 30% growth in earnings. Those are my 3 ingredients: top line revenue growth, and getting more efficient to grow profit by reducing my costs, so improving my margins, and then using M&A to fill out that 30 percentile, kind of growth rate in earnings. And if I can do that, I'm guaranteed a great exit. I'll, quadruple my size in 5 years. So I want to get to this exit point. If we work our entire lives, so let me give you a quick statistic. If a company with 1 million in revenue is growing at 10% a year, it'll get to about 7 million, $8 million, over a 22-year period. If it's growing at 30% a year, same company, it gets to about $720 million, in revenue. It's massively different numbers that are involved if we can get our growth rate much higher. 10% is a lousy growth rate. A lot of entrepreneurs out there think 10% is good. 10% sucks. The rule of 72. If I'm growing at 10%, it takes 7.2 years to double my revenue. So 1 million becomes 2 million in 7 years. 2 million becomes 4 million in 14 years. And 14 becomes, 28, and I've got 22 years in, and it's like I got a walker, and I'm getting old. I'm 61. Hell, I've got a drool bucket, and I'm wearing Depend undergarments, so it's like we don't have time. Time is not our friend when we're building companies. And I'd like to see entrepreneurs get 3 exits in 10 years, not spend their entire career working for one exit. So multiple bites of the apple, multiple exits, building the same company that you already got. No need to walk away and start something new. Why not stay where you're already at? Boy, I'm mixing a lot of concepts, Ethan. I better stop. I better shut up.
That's it. No, that was amazing, Adam. I loved all of that. And it's the powerful roll up strategy, right? That, what Adam's talking about here. It's getting all the smaller companies at a lower multiple, putting them together, right? And getting them to the higher multiple where you get a big exit, right? And that's what Adam's, the master at. He's done, billion-dollar exits, right? Putting 50 plus, companies together and everything like that before. So I guess one question on that I think would be valuable for people is around like when we're looking at buying these businesses, the due diligence and integration phase, right? Because I think, we understand the 30, 20, 10, those types of rules, but are there some things that we should watch out for and that we should focus on, right? To make sure that it's smooth, right? Of what we're doing at that we
Yeah.
don't buy the dog with
So
fleas
so
and
I'll
we make
make
it
I'll make
good. Yeah.
one statement. In general, private equity does way too much diligence. They will frustrate the heck out of you. You'll think you've, just been, you've had excruciating, you've been having your wisdom teeth pulled for 6 months. It's like it never ends. It just goes on forever. They just do too much. But most entrepreneurs do too little. They do far too little diligence. And so I would tell you, most important aspect, and when I think about the M&A process, I'll use the letter of intent as the line of demarcation. So ahead of a letter of intent, I'm hunting. I'm looking for opportunities. I'm evaluating companies. I'm talking to owners. I'm looking at their financials. If I like what I see, I take everything they give me at face value, and I'm learning about their business. Then I offer them a letter of intent. This is what I'm willing to pay. These are the terms, kind of, and conditions. If you like this, we'll move into diligence and then eventually contracts, and we'll consummate a deal. So before letter of intent, I take everything at face value. After letter of intent, now I'm in diligence. Now Ronald Reagan said it, trust but verify. Well, that's exactly what we need to now do, which is question everything we've been told and make sure it's accurate. And so we start always with a quality of earnings, or we start by analyzing the financials of the company that we're looking to buy. Do they actually have the revenue that they said they did? Do they have the earnings that they reported? And you might think, well, how could they generate a financial statement if it wasn't accurate? Well, what I find is that smaller businesses that I'm looking to evaluate to buy often don't have sophisticated accounting teams. And they may have been doing their books wrong for years and not even know it. It's not that they're criminals who are misreporting their numbers. They don't know what they don't know, and they suck at doing their books, and their books are wrong. So I start by hiring accounting experts. And usually I find an accounting firm that has something that's called a transaction services advisory team, TSA, and I'm getting them to do a quality of earnings. And there's many different levels of quality of earnings. If I'm buying $1 million company, I don't need to do public, company quality of earnings where they look at every single transaction that's ever happened, and they're applying a public company standard to it, for $1 billion company. And so I try to find the appropriate tool for the job, but we need to make sure, is the revenue there? Is the earnings there? Because most deals, if they're going to die, this is where they die. They die when I'm trying to verify the numbers. I find mistakes, when I get qualified people in to do some autopsy and analysis on their books. And it's like, hey, you know what? They've been misreporting earnings for years. They've been misreporting, their revenue for years. They don't make $1 million a year. They make 250,000 a year. Well, I can't honor my letter of intent, which contemplated a certain multiple for a certain size earnings if the earnings aren't there. So I encourage all entrepreneurs to get very focused when we first get into diligence on getting and making sure that the numbers are correct. And then I also tell people is if the numbers are right, so I have my own set of rules. If the earnings are within plus or minus, I'm going to use 5% for this, for this podcast. If they're within plus or minus 5%, I just close. If they're off from 5% to 30%, I'll potentially reprice and I'll come back and I'll have a negotiation. But if the books are off by more than 30%, generally I educate the owner, hey, listen, there's some problems in the books. Here's what we found. I don't want to offend you by offering you this low ball price. So better for me just to show you what's wrong and I'll walk away. And you work on your business, come back and see me. I still love you, still love the business, but you need to get your house in order. And so if I can get through the financial diligence, then there's a high probability I'm going to get to a closing table. So focus on finance first. Make sure the numbers are right. 90% of deals are going to die right there, if there's a problem. But if I get by that, I can contract around most other things that I might find that are wrong with a business. Maybe they've got too much customer concentration. Maybe their largest customer is 50% of revenue. Well, I like the largest customer to be 15% or less. And I like the top 10 customers to be 40% or less. But if I find a company that's got 4 customers, and their, top one's 50%, well, that's a problem. You lose that largest customer and your financing still got to get paid for, but the earnings that you're using to pay for the business just disappeared. So we have to be careful. But I can contract around that. I can withhold some of the payment instead of cash at close. I'm going to hold back a chunk of money for some length of time to make sure that we keep that big client renewed, that client doesn't leave. So anything I find, if the numbers are right, I can generally contract around other issues. And then finally, I bring in the lawyers and I start the cab meters running on legal fees to generate the kind of contracts that we need to get these businesses done. And I always would tell and counsel entrepreneurs out there, use competent counsel. This is not the time to use your golfing buddy who does your slip and fall accidents or your employment when someone sues you. It's like selling a company, buying a company. This is a specialty area of practice. You don't go to your dentist because you're trying to save a buck getting brain surgery done. And when it comes to buying companies or selling companies, we want competent counsel at the table who spend all day, every day doing nothing but business deals. They'll understand how to keep us out of trouble as an entrepreneur. It's a specialty area of practice. It's worth every penny that we pay. And the buyer or the seller potentially has sophisticated counsel at the table. If we don't, we could be taken advantage of. So we need to be careful, But in essence, it's as I'm doing diligence, I'm also focused heavily on what is the employee experience going to be. Think about the company you're buying. Those employees, what are they going to be worried about on closing day when they find out the company was sold? Do I have a job? Am I going to get laid off? Is my pay going to be the same? Are my benefits going to be the same? Is my seniority going to be the same? How is my life going to be impacted? And when I'm doing diligence, I focus heavily on understanding the employee experience and what it's going to look like post-close. Because once I own that business, if I'm already a business owner and I'm going to integrate, I need to know, where are these employees going to get upset? What's going to be their issues, their concerns, and how am I going to address them and plan for that? When we're buying a company, the golden rule is do no harm. We're buying revenue and earnings, and we're buying employees who service those customers and take care of whatever the product or service is. And we don't want to lose, all of these assets that we're acquiring, including the knowledge of all the people and employees. And so generally speaking, in diligence, if I want to, when I get to the closing and I'm starting to think about integration, Generally, in today's world with technology, I could move very fast. And I typically caution entrepreneurs move no faster than culture can assimilate. Do no harm. It's okay if so, I've got day one activity that has to be done. And I might have other things that can wait for 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, all the way out to a year. I've got a year to plan for integration. Use it. And I tell people to think of it like software development. So software is developed, and they call it in sprints. I got a 13-week sprint to my next release. So I think about what do I have to do day one? So I'm going to, all that change, hitting these employees, calm down. Let's wait 13 weeks. What do I got to do next? Slap them again. Wait 13 weeks. It's like do it in sprints. Let them catch up. Let them assimilate. I've got a year to integrate. And so these are some of the things that cross my mind when we're talking about this topic.
Yeah. No, I love it, Adam. That was extremely valuable and things that we need to think about to make sure, like you said, we get it right and it's a smooth process going forward as we build them in. And I just want to share your books as well. I do have them. So the private equity playbook here, the exit strategy playbook, and then the more recent one, Empire Builder, which I love. There we go. And yeah, I think all very powerful books, all Amazon #1 bestsellers. So everybody will have the links in the description. Make sure you go on there and check them out because they're all amazing. In there because and so knowledgeable and everything, just like you've shared here today, Adam, with so much stuff around growing a business properly and exiting properly and everything like that to make sure that we can get that big outcome that we want, right? We've got that plan in place. What's our exit period, what's our goal, and moving forward towards that. And I guess as we're starting to wrap up here now, Adam, what one key piece of advice would you like to give to all the entrepreneurs watching and listening today?
So I would tell you that success starts in here. It's in your head, it's in your brain. Why not you? Look in the mirror and ask yourself, what prevents you from achieving, the next level of success? And I think it starts with, a belief in ourselves that, hey, we can be successful. We can build a big business. We can get a giant payday at the end of it. If you don't believe in yourself, you don't believe this can actually happen, you're doomed from the start. It's like you have to develop a mentality that says, I'm not going to fail. I may get knocked down, but I'm going to get back up and I'm going to learn from those mistakes. When I went into GE, out of the service, I was competing with Harvard MBAs and, all these highly educated people. And I wasn't the smartest guy in the room, but they could, I told myself, they will not outwork me. I'll get up earlier, I'll stay up later, I'll work harder, I'll figure out how to get through an obstacle, over an obstacle, around it, underneath it. It's like I am not going to fail. And I think entrepreneurs, we start off in a defeatist position because we don't actually believe that we can do these things. I have 2.5 billion in exits as a CEO. Why can't you sell a company for $1 billion? I have. I'm not the smartest guy on the planet. Matter of fact, I've made every mistake you can, and I tried to write the books to be simple to read, easy to explain and understand, concepts, so that could stack the deck in your favor and have a higher probability of finding success. And so it starts, success starts in the mind with a mindset of I am going to do this. Why not me? I have a lot of friends that are billionaires. When I hang out at their house and I look at their walls and their curtains and I'm like, really? It's like this place is dirty. That needs to be changed. That needs got peeling paint on the walls. These are normal people who became ultra successful, because they were all in and they believed in what they were doing. You can find success. That's the key. Think it and then make it happen. Try to, get up when you're knocked down, learn from your mistakes, get back in the fight.
Yeah, that's amazing. Love that. Completely agree on that one, Adam. And yeah, we connected, through our networks, seeing at your many events and when you're learning about your awesome journey from, US Army veteran, pilot, former GE executive, and now the founder of advisory guru. You're an awesome guy, mate. So knowledgeable and so much gold, that you've shared with us here today to build a proper business and to exit and understand how we can create that big payday and create that success, like you're saying, right? That we all deserve it and is possible for all of us. And I'm sure you continue to drive, transformational growth and foster high performance cultures. Very grateful that we connected and look forward to partnering with you as well. So, Adam, how can people find you and your books and everything like that and get in
My
touch?
books, Amazon's pretty much global. You can buy my books on Amazon or anywhere books are sold, and you can find me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is my social media platform of choice. 800 million plus business people on LinkedIn. That's where I hang out. I don't have a team of people who go through I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, cup of coffee in my hand, cat on my lap, and I am digging in. And so if you reach out to me on LinkedIn, you actually get me. And it won't be a proxy or a publicist, and that's where I'd say people can find me. There's a bunch of websites, books, websites, LinkedIn. It's like these are the places where you find me. AdamECoffee.com, the chairmangroup.us, CEOadvisoryguru.com. I'm all over the place. You'll find me. I promise.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely check out him there. Definitely get his books. They're amazing. Check out those websites, connect with him on LinkedIn, see what he's putting out there. And it's been a pleasure interviewing you, mate. And thanks for being on the Business Growth Show.
Thanks for having me, Ethan, and good luck to everybody out there. You can do this. You got it.
Thank you for watching and listening to the Business Growth Show, where we talk about everything on business growth. And please like, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star review. You can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube as Ethan Cassiotis, or visit my website, ethancassiotis.com. And if you want to grow and scale your business, you can reach out to me on any platform to see if we're a good fit. So until next time, remember that our business grows where we learn skills and take action using them in spite of fear. So let's create wealth and freedom together.